The claim surrounding a massive $800 million lawsuit and its supposed victory is not grounded in any verifiable fact. While the story has been circulating across various online platforms, a thorough review of credible news outlets, public court records, and verified press releases reveals no indication that such a lawsuit was ever filed, let alone won. This absence of official information is not merely an oversight, it is a clear signal that the story does not hold up under scrutiny. In today's information age, where digital content can be created and disseminated in seconds, it is vital to separate sensationalized fiction from documented reality. One of the most telling signs that the story lacks credibility is the absence of coverage by mainstream and reputable news organizations. A legal case involving such a staggering amount, $800 million, especially if it targeted a public figure in a judicial role, would dominate headlines across political and legal reporting. Instead, the story appears exclusively on lesser-known websites with histories of publishing clickbait or misinformation, many of which lack basic transparency about their editorial standards or sources. This discrepancy alone casts significant doubt on the veracity of the claims being made. Moreover, the legal process in the United States is transparent and documented. High-stakes lawsuits, particularly those involving public officials or figures, typically generate paper trails, court filings, dockets, legal motions, and media reports tracking the progress and decisions made. In this case, none of those exist. Searches through publicly accessible legal databases return no results that even remotely resemble the described litigation. The legal community, journalists who cover the judicial system, and watchdog organizations who monitor such high-profile cases have not acknowledged any such suit. The complete absence of legal documentation or procedural evidence further supports the conclusion that the story is fictional. Additionally, a claim of an $800 million judgment raises practical questions about the mechanics and feasibility of such a lawsuit. The amount itself is extraordinary, and awards of that size are exceedingly rare, particularly in defamation or civil rights contexts. Courts require extensive evidence, procedural rigor, and due process before even considering awards in the multi-million-dollar range, much less in the hundreds of millions. Settlements or judgments that exceed even $100 million are usually subject to lengthy appeals, judicial reviews, and widespread public and legal commentary. No such processes appear to have occurred in this case, further emphasizing the unlikelihood of the story being factual. It's also important to consider the role of misinformation in shaping public perception. Social media platforms and fringe news outlets often serve as breeding grounds for dramatic, emotionally charged narratives that lack accountability. These platforms can quickly turn speculative fiction into viral news, misleading audiences who may not take the time to verify claims or question the legitimacy of sources. In this context, the story surrounding the alleged legal win serves more as a tool of viral sensationalism than a genuine report of judicial success. It capitalizes on outrage and political bias rather than presenting substantiated events. There is also the matter of narrative convenience. The story is structured in a way that aligns perfectly with certain political and ideological agendas, portraying a moment of triumphant justice against a symbol of authority. This alignment with ideological sentiment is a common tactic used in fabricated stories, aiming to confirm pre-existing beliefs rather than challenge audiences to think critically. The exaggerated figure of $800 million, combined with the supposed defeat of a high-profile figure, makes the tale emotionally satisfying for some, but emotional satisfaction is not a substitute for factual accuracy. The story's spread, despite its lack of evidence, illustrates the dangers of unchecked virality. Once shared, such stories are rarely walked back or corrected with the same intensity. Audiences who see a headline may never read a retraction or fact-check, leading to long-lasting misconceptions and erosion of trust in legitimate institutions. The rapid circulation of such unfounded stories ultimately contributes to a landscape where truth becomes subordinate to entertainment, and where baseless claims are granted the same weight as well-documented facts. The absence of verification from authoritative bodies, legal institutions, journalistic organizations, or official government channels should serve as a strong indicator of the story's unreliability. When no paper trail, no reliable source, and no corroborating evidence exists, the only reasonable conclusion is that the event in question simply did not happen. The rise of misinformation across digital platforms has created a complex challenge for individuals seeking accurate, trustworthy news. The narrative involving a supposed $800 million lawsuit win is an example of how unverified claims can take root and spread widely, even when no factual basis supports them. These types of stories often originate on obscure websites or social media pages that prioritize clicks and engagement over journalistic integrity. When misinformation is repeated frequently enough, especially when wrapped in emotionally charged or politically appealing language, it begins to masquerade as truth, causing confusion among audiences who are not equipped to evaluate the reliability of what they read or hear. A primary feature of misinformation is its reliance on sensationalism. The claim of an enormous lawsuit victory fits this pattern perfectly. It features a staggering monetary figure, a dramatic legal battle, and a powerful antagonist. These elements are designed to trigger strong emotional reactions, which in turn increases the likelihood that individuals will share the story without pausing to consider whether it is factual. Sensational headlines are the engine of misinformation campaigns because they thrive on emotional momentum rather than rational analysis. Stories like these bypass logical scrutiny by tapping into deeply held biases and beliefs, providing validation rather than illumination. When false narratives like this one are picked up by low-credibility sources, they often get repeated across a network of similar websites and social media pages. This echo chamber effect creates a false sense of consensus. If multiple sites are saying the same thing, the story must be true. At least, that's how it feels to the average reader. In reality, these sites are often interlinked or share the same content creators, meaning they're just amplifying the same misinformation across different channels. This replication gives the illusion of independent confirmation, but in truth, it's a closed loop of unverified repetition. Another troubling aspect of misinformation is the way it erodes trust in legitimate institutions. When people are exposed to a fabricated story that aligns with their worldview, and then they discover that major news outlets are not reporting on it, they may assume there's a conspiracy of silence. Rather than questioning the validity of the original story, they question the credibility of reputable journalism. This inversion of trust has far-reaching implications. It weakens the public's ability to distinguish between professional reporting and amateur speculation. As a result, audiences are increasingly fragmented, each operating in their own bubble of truth, disconnected from a shared reality. The speed at which misinformation travels also plays a significant role in its potency. Social media algorithms reward engagement above all else. A dramatic post is far more likely to go viral than a nuanced or fact-based one. By the time fact-checkers or reliable sources catch up to debunk a false story, it has already reached thousands, sometimes millions, of people. Most of those readers will never see the correction, and even if they do, psychological studies show that retractions rarely have the same emotional impact as the initial claim. This is known as the continued influence effect, where misinformation continues to influence beliefs and decisions even after being disproven. Compounding the problem is the lack of media literacy among many internet users. Without the tools to assess source reliability, identify clickbait tactics, or recognize bias, individuals are especially vulnerable to misleading stories. Many do not understand how to cross-check claims with independent outlets, or they may not have the time or motivation to do so. This creates fertile ground for misleading narratives to flourish. Educating people about how to critically evaluate what they read is a crucial step in combating the spread of false information, but such education is still lacking in many communities and school systems. The people behind these fabricated stories often have specific goals, political, financial, or ideological. By framing a particular figure as victorious over a system or individual that is unpopular with a certain demographic, they generate both traffic and loyalty. These stories are crafted to fit into an existing narrative that appeals to a target audience. The audience, in turn, becomes emotionally invested in the outcome, reinforcing their sense of identity and belief system. This cyclical dynamic of creation, dissemination, and consumption is what sustains misinformation and gives it such staying power. Once misinformation becomes entrenched, reversing its effects becomes an uphill battle. Even when confronted with solid evidence that a story is false, individuals who have emotionally committed to it may resist changing their minds. Cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs, leads some people to reject the correction outright rather than reconsider their initial stance. This is one reason why fabricated stories, especially those that are emotionally or ideologically charged, are so difficult to eradicate. They fulfill a psychological need that facts. Public figures today are increasingly confronted with the consequences of misinformation, especially when it is crafted to exploit political, ideological, or cultural divisions. As fabricated narratives gain traction online, many of those misrepresented in such stories are compelled to publicly disavow claims that were never true to begin with. When misinformation spreads widely, the individuals falsely associated with it often feel the need to speak out, not only to correct the record, but also to address the larger implications of how falsehoods damage public discourse and trust in the media. Misinformation in the digital era spreads far faster than factual corrections. False stories tend to be more novel, more emotionally gripping, and more aligned with polarizing viewpoints, all of which contribute to their virality. This asymmetry means that once a false narrative has circulated, it rarely dies quietly. Instead, it lingers in public memory, reinforced by repetition and the refusal of certain segments of the audience to accept corrections. When a public figure publicly refutes such a story, their intention often extends beyond personal clarification. They aim to raise awareness about the danger of accepting unverified information as truth. Addressing misinformation publicly requires more than just issuing a denial. Many individuals choose to confront the structure and incentives of the online ecosystem that allowed the false story to flourish. This includes highlighting how digital platforms reward engagement over accuracy, how partisan media environments reinforce confirmation bias, and how bad actors exploit algorithmic trends to plant and amplify falsehoods. These figures often speak about the need for stronger media literacy, calling attention to the fact that without critical thinking and source evaluation skills, people will continue to fall victim to manipulative narratives that serve agendas, rather than truth. When someone targeted by misinformation makes a statement or issues a response, it typically reflects a broader concern about the fragility of truth in an era where information is both plentiful and unreliable. They understand that public confidence in journalism, government, and even democratic institutions can be undermined by repeated exposure to lies disguised as news. Rather than ignoring the misinformation or dismissing it as internet noise, they feel a responsibility to engage, to explain, and to reaffirm a commitment to facts. Such statements often draw a line between honest disagreement and the reckless dissemination of falsehoods. It is one thing to debate policy or strategy, and quite another to fabricate victories, legal battles, or scandals that never occurred. Those who speak out against false claims often emphasize this distinction, not just to protect their own reputations, but to reassert a shared standard for public debate, one based on reality. They remind the public that disagreement should be grounded in what is true and verifiable, not what is convenient or emotionally satisfying. The people misrepresented. In viral stories frequently advocate for better accountability from digital platforms and media outlets. They may call for stronger content moderation, improved fact-checking systems, or greater transparency about the origins of stories. In doing so, they hope to shift the incentives that currently reward sensationalism over accuracy. Some also highlight the role of anonymous or pseudonymous accounts in spreading falsehoods, raising concerns about how anonymity can be weaponized to mislead and manipulate. Public denunciations of misinformation can also have an educational purpose. By walking audiences through the process of how a story is fabricated, shared, and ultimately debunked, they aim to equip others with tools to recognize similar patterns in the future. They may point to red flags like the absence of credible sources, the use of emotionally charged language, or the repetition of claims without citation. Through this approach, they hope to foster a culture of skepticism, not cynicism, but a healthy, informed skepticism that asks, where did this come from, and why should I believe it? In many cases, the effort to correct misinformation is an ongoing battle rather than a one-time statement. False claims, once introduced into the public consciousness, have a way of resurfacing, especially in politically charged environments. Those who seek to counter these claims must often do so repeatedly, adapting their message to different audiences and platforms. Despite the emotional toll and the risk of backlash, they persist because they recognize the broader stakes involved, not just personal reputation, but the integrity of public dialogue itself. Speaking out against misinformation is not merely reactive, it is also an act of civic responsibility. It acknowledges that truth, while sometimes less flashy than fiction, is essential for informed decision-making and social trust. Those who challenge false narratives are attempting to create space for reason and evidence in a landscape that too often rewards outrage and deception. They do so not only to defend themselves, but to contribute to a healthier information ecosystem. In a world where news travels faster than ever before, the importance of relying on credible sources cannot be overstated. The digital landscape is saturated with content, ranging from rigorously researched journalism to outright fabrications. This abundance of information, while empowering in many ways, also places a greater responsibility on individuals to discern truth from fiction. Sensational headlines and emotionally charged stories may capture attention, but without grounding in verified facts, they distort reality and mislead audiences. When evaluating any claim, especially those that seem dramatic, improbable, or politically charged, it is essential to consider where the information originates, how it's presented, and whether it has been corroborated by independent, reputable outlets. Credible sources uphold certain journalistic standards that distinguish them from outlets that prioritize clicks over accuracy. These standards include the use of multiple verifiable sources, clear attributions, editorial oversight, fact-checking protocols, and a willingness to correct mistakes when they occur. Trusted media institutions often have long-standing reputations to protect, and as a result, they adhere to ethical guidelines that help ensure their reporting is as accurate and fair as possible. In contrast, websites designed solely to generate ad revenue or to promote a particular ideological agenda may publish content that lacks verification, context, or accountability. These sites often exploit reader emotions to increase engagement, even at the expense of truth. One of the most dangerous aspects of unreliable news is its ability to imitate legitimate journalism. Articles may be formatted to look like credible reports, complete with fabricated quotes, fake sources, or misleading graphics. This tactic creates a superficial sense of authenticity that can deceive even savvy readers. In some cases, false stories are bolstered by doctored images or videos, making the misinformation appear even more convincing. Without the discipline of checking facts and tracing claims back to original sources, it is easy for this kind of content to pass as genuine, particularly when it aligns with the reader's pre-existing beliefs. The rise of misinformation has demonstrated that many people place more trust in stories that confirm their worldview, regardless of whether those stories are factual. This phenomenon, known as confirmation bias, makes individuals more susceptible to accepting falsehoods if those falsehoods reinforce their opinions or prejudices. That's why critical engagement with information is so important. Before accepting any claim, especially one with significant implications, readers should ask themselves, is this source reputable? Have other trustworthy outlets reported the same thing? Are there direct quotes, documentation, or public records to support the narrative? Fact-checking organizations have become essential allies in the fight against misinformation. These organizations investigate claims, verify details, and provide context that is often missing from viral stories. They operate independently of political affiliations and follow transparent methodologies to evaluate whether a claim is true, false, misleading, or lacking evidence. Consulting these organizations can help readers navigate the noise and gain a more accurate understanding of contentious topics. Moreover, many major newsrooms now have their own internal fact-checking departments to ensure that their content meets professional standards before publication. The consequences of relying on untrustworthy sources extend beyond individual misunderstanding. They affect entire communities and societies. When false stories take root, they can shape public opinion, influence political decisions, and damage the reputations of innocent people. They may also divert attention and resources from real issues that deserve coverage. In the most extreme cases, misinformation can incite violence, sow division, or undermine democratic institutions. Preventing these outcomes begins with making careful choices about where to get information and being willing to question stories that seem too convenient or emotionally charged to be entirely true. Educating people about how to evaluate sources is a long-term solution to a problem that is unlikely to go away on its own. Media literacy involves more than just reading headlines. It includes understanding how information is produced, recognizing bias, identifying logical fallacies, and knowing how to compare different reports on the same subject. By developing these skills, individuals are better equipped to protect themselves from being manipulated by disinformation. These tools empower people not only to be informed consumers of media, but also responsible participants in public discourse. Digital platforms also have a role to play in elevating trustworthy sources. Algorithms that prioritize engagement often promote the most provocative content, regardless of its accuracy. This has led to a situation in which truth competes with sensationalism in an uneven playing field. However, changes in algorithmic design, greater transparency in content promotion, and efforts to flag or remove false information can help restore balance. Platforms that commit to these changes contribute to a healthier information environment, one where reliable reporting has a better chance of reaching audiences than fabricated narratives designed to mislead. Choosing credible sources is ultimately an act of responsibility. It reflects a commitment to understanding the world as it is, rather than how one might wish it to be. While no source is infallible, consistent reliance on institutions with transparent processes, editorial accountability, and professional integrity dramatically increases the likelihood of being accurately informed. In a time when the line between information and manipulation is increasingly blurred, this commitment to credibility is not only wise, it is essential. In the face of a rapidly evolving digital media landscape, the need for discernment, skepticism, and commitment to truth has never been more critical. The proliferation of false narratives, especially those that gain traction through social media and fringe platforms, poses a profound threat not only to individual understanding, but also to the collective integrity of public discourse. When stories are shared not for their accuracy but for their ability to provoke, inflame, or entertain, the foundations of rational dialogue and informed decision-making begin to erode. This deterioration affects everything from how communities relate to one another to how democratic institutions function under the weight of misinformed public pressure. The responsibility to protect and uphold truth does not lie solely with journalists, fact-checkers, or digital platforms. It also rests with each individual. Every time someone shares a headline without verification, repeats a claim without scrutiny, or chooses engagement over inquiry, they contribute to a cycle that rewards deception. Conversely, when individuals pause, ask questions, cross-reference sources, and value evidence over impulse, they become part of a much-needed solution. In doing so, they help re-establish a culture in which facts matter and reasoned debate is possible. At the heart of this issue is a fundamental choice: to be a passive consumer of information or an active participant in truth-seeking. The former path may be easier, more entertaining, and even emotionally satisfying at times, but it comes at the cost of clarity, understanding, and often justice. The latter requires effort, critical thinking, and the humility to accept facts that may challenge one's own beliefs. Yet, it is through that effort that individuals and societies remain grounded in reality and capable of addressing real challenges. False stories, particularly those designed to stoke division or mislead, are not harmless. They shape perceptions, alter behavior, and in some cases drive public sentiment based on entirely fabricated premises. That kind of influence cannot be ignored or dismissed as a byproduct of the internet age. It must be countered with vigilance, integrity, and a collective commitment to truth. When people stand up against misinformation, call out unreliable sources, and encourage others to think critically, They reinforce the values that support an informed and engaged society. Ultimately, the goal is not to create a world free of disagreement or debate. Differing opinions are essential to democracy and progress. But meaningful dialogue can only occur when all participants operate from a shared understanding of what is real. That foundation is built through credible sources, honest reporting, and a widespread respect for facts. By choosing accuracy over popularity and truth over tribalism, individuals help restore that foundation, ensuring that public conversation remains a tool for progress,